Thank you. Wonderful intro, and also going to say, Alessandra, of course, food very important to A Christmas Carol. I've not gone for the slide route, being the media person. I'm going old school. Dickens is not just for Christmas, but he has become associated with that season in part due to the popularity of A Christmas Carol. Yep, the right side. And not only his other Christmas novels, but also due to his championing of Christmas and Christmas stories as a periodical editor. When you can release a film about a historical personage and call it The Man Who Invented Christmas and expect people to know who that is, the association's still present. The Gothic is not just for Christmas, neither are ghost stories. As we have already heard, though, there is a strong association in England between the ghost story and Christmas, one that the Victorians, yes, including Dickens, picked up on and promoted and reshaped for a modern, literate, urban middle class in particular. To me, what connects the Gothic, the ghost story, and Christmas is the idea of reflection and the way that the past connects to and remains active in the present, a hauntological feeling. To move on into the future, we have to face our ghosts and deal with, or at least acknowledge, the traumas of the past. So, this is what connects my previous research into seasonal horror with my current research into what I'm terming Gothic historical television dramas and need to find a shorter term. That is, fictional productions set in the past that are presented in a Gothic mode of desaturated colours, violence, and dirt, dealing with oppression and trauma, often with elements of anachronism. The aesthetics signal that this is a Gothic text, and so encourage the audience to consider it in terms of traumas from the past, while the anachronisms serve to underscore that these traumas have lingering effects on or are still active in our present. And I will note they might be perceived anachronisms rather than actual anachronisms. What people deem to be accurate is often not. Um, we might come on to that. While this might seem at odds with Christmas, the BBC in particular has had a strong history of such adaptations, although that does seem to be shifting again. Thinking back over the past few years, a number of the Agatha Christie adaptations, such as And Then There Were None from 2015, or the ABC Murders with John Malkovich in 2018, could be included in this Gothic mode. Similarly, I would include the 2020 Black Narcissus. The move towards a more colourful and comforting engagement with the past, such as in last year's Murder is Easy, and Nicholas Winding Refn's The Famous Five, suggests a shift in commissioning, although there are certainly still some bleaker productions. For the rest of this talk, then, I will focus on the first two of what I understand to be three Dickens adaptations that Stephen Knight has been commissioned to write for the BBC: A Christmas Carol and Great Expectations. A Christmas Carol was broadcast over the Christmas period, while Great Expectations was broadcast in March and April, taking it out of the festive theme for this event, for which I hope to be forgiven. What this may help us to look at, though, is whether there is a connection between the Gothic and winter festivals, and also to consider seasonality and the endings of each of these adaptations, each of which took its own liberties with the original text. Of course, Gothic adaptations of Dickens and of these two texts in particular are nothing new. Yet, for A Christmas Carol, familiarity and a number of comical treatments, thank you Muppets, uh, may well have led to it losing some of its edge. Night, in turn, leads into the Gothic to horror, beyond that offered up by Dickens in order to emphasize the social issues that the original was commenting on. their relevance to the present day, and to update and expand upon those issues. He also offers a much more, definite air quotes, realistic ending. Instead of a complete conversion and a promise to be good from now on, Scrooge instead indicates his intention to try to be good from now on, to make his actions have positive rather than negative effects. This emphasizes the idea of reflection and learning from the past rather than a simpler transformation. Similarly, Great Expectations presents a rather different ending to the novel, but again, one that is more complex than Dickens. Pip, for example, is left to happily marry the woman who has loved him since childhood and to return to his Essex village life rather than building a life in trade. This is a different kind of rebirth out of the Gothic darkness and into an English pastoral. Even Miss Havisham survives, her fortune much diminished, but the guilt of the past burned away in a fiery destruction of the Gothic house haunted by the past in true horror film manner. That past was the past of international trade, particularly the China trade, including opium. And this brings us to what specifically Knight is doing with these adaptations, and so how he is using the Gothic mode. He is focusing on the trauma of international capitalism and the way that this exploitation of people distorts and damages relationships and society globally. Both adaptations present societies where pretty much everything is dealt with as an exchange, a trade, and all things, including people and their affections, are commodities. Both Scrooge and Pip are essentially sold. Scrooge's father arranges to leave him at his boarding school over the holidays, where it is implied he is sexually abused by his schoolmaster in exchange for the school fees being waived. That same father states that there is no such thing as a gift, such as a Christmas present, only a debt that has yet to be repaid. Pip, meanwhile, is traded for the money from Miss Havisham to his family, and for the potential of his great expectations, which will take him away from his home life to life as a gentleman, for which read a wealthy trader. Miss Havisham plans to trade Estella's affections as revenge for her own abandonment and has no qualms about employing the services of one of the village women to teach Pip about sex. In the novel, Mr. Pumblechook is a typical example of Dickens's more ridiculous characters, who seeks Pip's advancement for the way it will reflect well on him. In the adaptation, while Matt Berry plays him as very classically Dickensian in the breadth of the character, it is also revealed that part of his interest in Pip is because he employs Pip's guardian, Mrs. Gargery, to serve him sexually, primarily or entirely through beating him. In both adaptations, this trade is shown to be personal but also global. I've already mentioned Miss Havisham's connection to the China trade, shown through her costume, through the pins in her hair, through the decorations in the house, through her partaking in opium, through her treasure being stored as Chinese coins. But the adaptation also deals with the trade in people, through Joe Gargery being offered good money to make chains and shackles for a slaver ship, which he refuses, or through Mr. Jagger's principled crusade against slavers, concealed as self-interested trade and investment in or legal work for those companies. So there is good in these adaptations, set up against the demands of global capital. Those demands cannot be entirely escaped, as they are the system, but happiness is to be found in family, in society, in companionship, not wealth or business. And while the business transactions of Scrooge and Havisham are shown to be exploitative, to have a ripple effect that expands misery, the promise of the reformed Scrooge and the actions of Jaggers suggest that it is possible to use those same networks of business to have a positive, wider effect. Now, to start bringing in some theoretical frameworks, and wave if I'm running out of time, This is where the programs could be accused of being what Hunter Hargraves has described as woke television, which uses wokeness in primarily discursive and aesthetic ways that conceives of political action primarily in terms of awareness and shifts in perception rather than more direct action. This is not to say that there is no value in enhancing awareness and shifting perception. And it could be argued that it is going too far to expect all television to encourage direct action. Certainly, these productions were accused of wokeness, largely because they included Black British and British Asian performers, rather than the purely white class cast which many seem to expect of Dickens' adaptations. And there are literary people here who know better than me, but Dickens was himself anti-slavery, but primarily interested in matters of social class and economic disparity in England rather than in issues of race, which he barely mentions. Yet Knight's expansion of ideas of exploitation to provide a more intersectional consideration of class, race, and gender not only offers opportunities for a wider range of performers and serves to emphasize the continued relevance of these concerns, but it also advances Dickens's concerns in ways that are clearer from a modern perspective. This intersectional view, in other words, challenges the heritage view of Dickens' adaptations, which can be expected to provide comfort and familiarity appropriate to the festive season in particular. Even accepting Dickens's social concerns, it can be easy to think of these as being relegated to the past rather than having continued relevance. Dickens told people about it in A Christmas Carol. Everyone loved A Christmas Carol, therefore poverty is solved. However, with visibly diverse casting and with clear references to international trade and practices which are recognizably modern, such as Scrooge's outsourcing of manufacturing to countries such as India, Knight's adaptations remain historically appropriate, while at the same time strongly suggesting continued relevance. This is made even clearer in the final moments of his A Christmas Carol, when Mrs. Cratchit addresses the unseen spirits on Scrooge's turn towards redemption, saying that there is much work still to do, and turns to look down the camera straight at the audience. This aspect was probably the most contentious of this adaptation. You can find many people complaining about that moment in particular. And that's probably because it is challenging the audience directly to not just take this as a story, a piece of entertainment from the past, but to think about its relevance. In other words, this goes beyond the feel-bad heritage of Helen Wheatley, which offers a darker, more sinister version of the past, consisting of narratives of fear and anxiety set in a past which is not only marked by a sense of decay or dilapidation, but which is also disturbed by uncanny happenings and supernatural events. In those cases, the horror is part of the past, while here it is signaled as being part of the present, of being not just Scrooge's problem or the Victorians' problem, but our problem. In doing so, Knight is once again doing what Dickens himself was doing, signalling the presence of social problems and indicating some causes, and arguably offering examples of forms of resistance and address. And this is what causes the complaints, well, some of them at least. We've come to have a view of the festive season as one of relaxation, of family, and most of all, of comfortable consumption. This could even include dealing with difficult material in the name of entertainment. Note that the BBC in particular is more likely to show something like ballet or opera on BBC Two at Christmas, where that would be relegated to BBC Four at other times of the year. Christmas can even be the perfect time for a binge watch. To return to Hargraves, he argues that post-millennial television has increased in difficulty in terms of plot complexity and the representation of difficult or unpleasant themes and characters, in part because that is deemed a marker of quality, building on older ideas that hard work is good for you, is improving. How very Victorian. Hargraves argues that even entertainment, then, is training us to put up with the difficult situations of late capitalism because discomfort is good for us. But Knight's Dickens adaptations push back against this. They show that the difficult situations are at least in part caused by the choices made by other people and by the systems that connect us. They show that there is pleasure and comfort to be found in relationships with other people, with community. But they also show in a very Dickensian way that these relationships are not just a bulwark, a way of surviving the systems, but that they can provide the strength to push back and effect some difference, however small. And this is part of the heritage of Christmas, in part through Dickens's work in emphasizing Christian values of reflection and charity rather than commerce and consumption. But as I said at the beginning, Dickens is not just for Christmas. So one thing to consider about the festive Gothic is whether that additional context of ideas about the festive season influence how we read Gothic historical dramas, whether it makes us more accepting of ideas about goodness and charity, but makes some less accepting of ideas of challenging dominant social structures, particularly those of consumerist capitalism. As Tom Lehrer sang, God rest ye merry merchants, may ye make the Yuletide pay. Merry Christmas.
That was excellent. Thanks so much, Derek. We've got lots more Zoom claps going on, and we've got some nice dark festive themes coming out of those adaptations, and I think making us want to go and rewatch them again. I think when the 2019 one came out, we definitely were quite preoccupied with that, with talking about that. So it'd be good to hear what people think about it.